AnxietyCenter.com podcasts, where we talk about everything anxiety, as well as other medical, mental, behavioral, parenting, and nutritional health topics. Thank you for joining us. We hope you find today's podcast interesting and inspiring. Here are your hosts, Jim and Marilyn Folk.
Hi, I'm Jim Folk.
And I'm Marilyn Folk. We are the founders of AnxietyCenter.com and the hosts of AnxietyCenter.com podcasts.
Thanks again for joining us today. This is episode 7. Today we're going to air part 3 of our conversation with Brian Sellers, one of AnxietyCenter.com's recommended therapists. If you missed the first 2 parts of this conversation, you may want to listen to episodes 5 and 6. Here is part 3 of our conversation with Brian. Another aspect I think a lot of times people will struggle for a long time is because you don't seek help. They think that they can do this on their own. And, it was interesting. We did a poll a few years ago about how many self-help books people had. And they usually come back with, at least 5 or more in their library. Many had, 20. Yet most of them were only partially read, and they've had them for, 10 years, and they still haven't made any progress. Right. I think reason they don't make progress is because they don't come for good help, and self-help information can only go so far. But it's all the rest of the expertise that's required in order for them to make substantial progress.
Yeah, good point, Jim. I wanted to add, and I may not have added this before. One of the things that's so important, and you hear me talk about this all the time, is as a coach, I think I am good at teaching the skills, but I think I'm even better at providing reassurance, and we need that. We need that constantly, initially especially. We have to, I think we need somebody to literally take our hand through this process and walk us through it and provide reassurance all the way. Now, that's not always the case. At some point, you're going to build that confidence in yourself. I always remind my clients that my goal is not to keep them with me, but to provide them the skills and send them out and for them to send somebody else my way, maybe, but not to to keep them addicted to me, so to speak. We call that being their container or containing for them. But bottom line is we need somebody many times to walk us through this and to help us with that process. And generally, we just aren't going to be able to do that on our own. And I can't tell you how many clients. I actually am working with a client this week who said he was a member of the website for many years and had gotten a lot of good results and had come a long way. And he's certainly not starting from square one in any way, shape, or form. He's doing pretty well, but he recognizes, hey, I want to get to these core beliefs. I want to get underneath this and really address this and provide that real confidence that he needs to say, I don't ever have to think the way I was thinking before that led me down that road. So, no doubt it's reassurance is a big part of that in that process, and I think you can only get that through someone that really understands the process and has been there and has learned the skills in order to recover themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You mentioned support. Support is so important, and I think a lot of people miss that. Because, often we grow up in families where, the environment isn't healthy. That's why we develop anxious behaviors.
Sure.
And then we're trying to make, self-help change in amongst the people who still have unhealthy behaviors. And so, if we don't have someone who has been through this and has healthy behaviors to support us, it's very easy to say, well, it's not going to work. Maybe it's just not me or whatever. It's because the environment they're in is actually supporting unhealthy behavior. And this is where a coach can really make a big difference as they make that healthy change in the midst of that unhealthy environment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
You make a good point. I just want to say that I often tell my clients that it's difficult when you're the first one in the family system to begin to work on emotional health, because you're like plowing the road and all the rest of them are standing as a group saying, what are you doing? We don't do it that way, right? So the person can feel very isolated and alone.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and that's one of the things, and I've encountered that myself. Even though my family was very supportive, when you get outside the family structure, when things begin to become unique, some of the support is just not there. Even with a family that was always very supportive, there were situations that I found myself in, specifically when it came to, and my wife was very supportive, but when I came to changing careers and finding what best fits me, and one of the reasons why I felt so trapped, like I said, for years, was I was trapped in a career that was really unfulfilling too. So we begin to make some of those changes. There's no doubt that our support system, or like Jim says, the lack thereof, can really respond and react to that with some resistance, and so we have to have that support that comes alongside us and can kind of what we call normalize that for each of us, so that we're able to make some of those steps. And
Yeah.
It's interesting. Last week we posted a graphic that said worrying is one of the most common thinking errors. And a lot of people received it, and then, and I can relate this because this is my family for sure. One person said, "Oh, but it's good because it shows that you care." Right?
Yes, absolutely.
And that's my dad, and I was asking him, "So Dad, why are you worrying so much?" He says, "Because I love you."
That's right.
And,
I love it.
And so if you're trying to make self-help change in that environment, you think worrying is a good thing.
That's right.
So
absolutely.
you wouldn't see why it's not a good thing, and there's a whole lot of different ways, healthy ways of showing love. But it's just an example of, if you don't have professional guidance, you can often remain stuck and not even know why.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's you're exactly right. When we've been taught that our entire life, that's healthy. That's a loving, caring family. It's hard to shuck that and say no. That no longer is is an option for us. And so I think that that's another really strong reason why we need that support.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah.
One of the things that kind of comes to mind is bottom line is it's a process. We tend to think of everything as kind of a destination, and most of my clients think of it when we first start talking about it, and we talk about the recovery process. They specifically want to hear about the recovery. What is that spot that I'm going to get to? What is that destination? What does that look like? And I think that, in regards to anxiety, it is a process. It's a process of recovery. Do I consider myself fully recovered? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you have to let yourself go through that process. And I think so often we live in such a society that really focuses on destinations. We look at, whether it be marriage or whether it be our first job or graduating from high school and college and universities, and the list goes on and on of those destinations that we're going to reach. Executive level or in the company or whatever those destinations are. And by the way, some of those things can be really unfulfilling because of our expectations that we have. But I think that, when most people go into, wanting to address their anxiety, they really kind of look at it as more of a destination rather than learning to live with this idea that it is a process. And that's one of the things that I try to remind them as we go through this is just where you are at the process. We, so often we, and I know Jim and Marilyn use this as well, but we talk about the stages of change and the process of change and what that looks like. But I found that the ones that really hold on to that as we go along, and they are allowing themselves to say, okay, this is just where I am, that I'm not going to say they can experience it that it's any quicker, but certainly I would say that for them it's definitely encouraging knowing where that they're in that process and they're allowing them to be themselves to be in that process rather than always focusing on where they need to be and destination. So, it is true that, and this is, we don't want to be Pollyanna here, but it's true that someone who learns to live in the present moment where they are is a person who's learned to, alleviate anxiety from their lives. But that in and of itself is a process, especially for those of us that were taught to focus on the future all the time. And you were talking about worry. That's what worry is. So, I think that process is something that people really struggle with because intellectually they understand it, but from an internalizing that, it just takes them a while to get to that point. And so, if you're starting out from square one, and you have to allow yourself to recognize you're in a process of recovery, and you're not. Our goal is to not focus on the destination all the time. I love college football. It's one of my favorite. If you talk to me very long, you're going to hear something about it. And, I know, Jim, you love your football as well.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things I always say is you don't, if you're a true fan of college football and you understand it, you don't expect to see the team walk out on the field with a bunch of true freshmen and win. It's just extremely rare. One of our old coaches at the college I went to used to say, if for every true freshman you start, that's one loss for the year. And I think about that in the context of recovery. You can't expect yourself to be an expert after a month of really working through the process. It's going to take us some time. That doesn't mean it's going to take you 4 years for those that understand college football, or 5 years, but it does mean that it's a process, and we have to learn how to walk through that rather than always focusing on the destination. So I think that's what I would say.
Yeah, good point.
Brian, have you had clients that are like looking for this magical statement or this one thing that's going to be the key that they recover with? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
What do you say to them?
Yeah, it's not going to happen. That's the first thing. Let's be realistic. This is not just one thing, and so often that's quite often how we've kind of lived our lives. And as I was growing up, and even through my own, you talked about how I coped earlier. Obviously, not very well. As I think there was always that magical formula. So it's the person that's looking for just the right remedy to whatever that may be. It may be a physical remedy. It may come in the form of some kind of nutritional supplement that's going to calm me down, or it may be in the form of like I think you were suggesting, just the this one skill or a lack of one skill that's just going to get me to where I go. But what we recognize is these many times are very subtle beliefs that have been, again, we've established these habits over years, and so we have to take our time and go through that and pick it up by the roots and discover that there are a lot of things that trap us and keep us trapped. Yeah. And it's not one specific remedy is going to is going to cure us, so to speak, of anxiety. That's the reason why we always talk about it being a process of recovery, because it is identifying the multiple beliefs and the multiple patterns of behaviors that have, and the thought patterns that have led us down that road. So it's not that simple, and we have to come into that and come into the recovery process and with that, with a realistic expectation. Yeah.
The other thing too, it speaks to time. A lot of times people will say, well, if I work at this, for a month or two, I should be good, right? the expectation of how fast it should be is unrealistic too. As you mentioned, we've grown up with those behaviors and used them for literally years and years and years. To expect to identify all of them, in a 2 or 3 week period and make healthy change in 2 months is really unrealistic.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I was joking about college football, but so often you see the coach that comes in, that they've just hired a new coach, and we say, well, he ought to be able to compete for a championship in the first year. There's such unrealistic expectations among people in terms of our philosophy on how we need to get things done in life in general. It needs to be done today or yesterday, and it shouldn't take me long to get that done. And like I said, it's just unrealistic. And I think the neat thing about this condition, I no longer look at it specifically, the condition as a whole, as something that has, obviously I make a living now of helping those with it. So it's been a great reward for me in that case, but it literally changed me. It changed my outlook on life. It changed how I responded and reacted. Like I said, as we talked about earlier, I wouldn't want to go back to old me. It's a non-symptomatic old me. I don't want him back. Yep. Even if you had to say, I'm going to wave the magic wand and not have the symptoms, there were still a lot of beliefs that just were, even if I wouldn't have felt physical consequences associated with those beliefs, I don't want to live that way anymore. I don't want to live with worry as a part of my life and fear and all those things that keep us stuck. So, to someone that, that thinks that way and says, I got to get it done today, you're going to struggle. No doubt about it. You got to be realistic. Absolutely.
And that's the other thing, too, with, working the process, because since it involves making behavioral change, and as we adopt the new behaviors, that's what sets us free for good, because now we've actually are behaving completely different. So it's rather impossible to fall back to be trapped in anxiety disorder again, because it's not like we provide a cure. It's not like you take a pill and it's cured. It's what we do is the cure comes in making all the changes so we live less anxiously, and that sustains us for good. And that's the piece that people who only achieve level 1 recovery don't get.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's why there's lots of rebounds. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's what I always say too, that, full recovery comes because we learn to think differently.
Yes.
So, it's that thinking differently that provides us with that healthy living going forward.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'll give you an illustration this week. My wife and son are going to Belize on a mission trip, and if that would have been me 10 years ago, I would have thought about everything that could go wrong on the trip. I don't think that way anymore. I have learned skills that, and it's at one time it would have been a real challenge, obviously, in learning that in that process. But now it's more automatic. That thought does not enter my mind. I'm not sitting there focusing on it. Like I said, that's a different way of thinking, and it takes us some time to get to that point. And but yeah, it really is. It's a different belief system that happens over time. And the neat thing is, I can't picture myself thinking like that anymore. I'm not going to. So it really is really rewarding when you begin to see that becoming the new natural me that many of us begin to see throughout the process. And I love it when my clients will call me and they've had those kinds of moments where they realize, wow, I just totally reacted differently than I've been reacting my entire life, and it's a real rewarding feeling to see people go through that and see that change.
It reminds me of I think one of your clients had mentioned this to you, Marilyn. Is she had come to you struggling with great anxiety, and her husband was upset because she was struggling so much, and as she worked through the process and became healthy, actually, she was helping him contain better. He was the one that was falling apart, and she was all together. Yeah,
absolutely. It's funny because you look at them sometimes. My wife's a good example of that. I used to say that Summer was not. That's my wife's name. Was not afraid of anything, and that's just not true. As we had children, and I recognized there was some fears related to that, and mommy fears, whatever you want to call them. But there was some fears that popped up, and I began to recognize that I had to teach her how to contain in some of those areas that for years I thought, she had tried to contain for me many times. But it's really neat when we realize, I've got skills that, even people that I had thought that never would experience any anxiety, because everyone has anxiety. Again, everyone can experience anxiety and stress, and no doubt about it, all do at different times in our life. It's how we respond to it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the things that we see is that we recognize, wow, I've got some tools and some skills that even those that we had had thought were rock solid in that area are they may need from time to time as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I found it really rewarding. Just recently, one of my clients came back and she said to me that her family told her that she's just this completely different person, that she just thinks so different. And they're like, what are you doing? What have you done?
Yeah.
It's like the real litmus test, when they come back, and it's their family, those people around them that see them in their everyday reactions. They see the changes as a result of the help that they have found working with our therapists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. For the families that are, very supportive, they may not understand a lot of things, but they're, are supportive. It's just really neat to watch that process of them coming back. And I always used to say that at times I had as much support from the spouse as I did from my clients, because the spouse is seeing the change over time, and they'll come back and say, no, you're going to hang in there because I'm seeing too much change, and they may say, well, I'm doing okay, but the spouse is saying, no, we're going to follow through with this, and so it's kind of neat to see those experiences too. That's not always the case, but many times I've seen that, and it's kind of neat to see that transpire.
We've also seen the situations where a sister will come in after her other sister went through the program and say, well, if she's doing so good, I need to do that. And then we've also had situations where the spouses come in after and say, well, my wife's doing so good, I think I need to work on this. So it just starts to snowball. After people get healthy, they see the benefits.
Yeah, I have one experience where I've helped the mother, and then I've helped 3 of her children that are all, about my age. But four different people out of that one family. Wow. And it's just neat. That's neat when you can see whole family trees changed in that area.
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the becoming healthy one person at a time notion, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. People want to know, what is it, like you said, what is it that you have? I really need that because I've, in certain areas they see their struggles, and so it's like you say, it's just it's really rewarding on our from our perspective of getting to see that change happen.
Yeah. I have a final comment here. I know anxious people will have the notion that life should be nice, happy, and safe, and so they try to stay within that framework, and they say, well, if life was only better, then I would be better. But, we have to be realistic. Life isn't that. Life has challenges. Life has difficulties. Life has unfair things that happen. And so what we do is we don't eliminate those dangers and risks, but what we do, we learn better ways to cope with it, uncertainty, adversity, and risk, and that makes all the difference.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I think that was a real struggle with me growing up. One of the things we see quite often, especially those who grew up in an overly protected background, is we may have that tendency to see that belief system in that area, like, life should be nice and safe and happy. And as I've told that over the years, some people have even laughed at me as I've said that, because I've said, they said, well, that's not realistic. I said, the problem is that's what I believed for many years, and it kept me stuck. And so when I came to that understanding that life was going to have bumps, and it was going to have situations that I couldn't control, that that I was going to be able to make it through that, and I had some skills in order to get me through that, then it created a level of confidence for me, so that I recognized that, again, I've learned to set my expectations realistically, and also I've got some skills to be able to get through that when it is bumpy. So it just changes our perspective, no doubt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, I wanted to thank you so much again for taking time out of your day. A great conversation. I'm sure our listeners will enjoy it, as we enjoyed talking with you about it. And we just wish you every success over this week, and we look forward to doing another segment.
Yeah, you all as well. I always enjoy talking with you and Marilyn. So,
great.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thanks for
Brian.
joining us.
You take care.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Okay.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
This ends part 3 of our conversation with Brian. Thanks again for listening. We hope you join us next time for episode 8 of AnxietyCenter.com podcasts.
We wish you every success in your recovery efforts. Bye for now.
Bye for now.